The moment my mother introduced me to my sister's future in-laws, I knew exactly how the rest of the night would go. "This is our other daughter," she said with that particular smile she reserved for situations that required damage control. "Lydia, she does alterations. You know, sewing, hemming, that kind of thing." My future brother-in-law's mother, a woman named Sandra who ran a commercial real estate firm out of Dallas, turned to look at me. Not the polite glance you give a stranger at a dinner party, a real look. The kind where someone is trying to place a face they've seen before but can't quite locate the memory. I smiled and extended my hand. "Lydia," Sandra repeated slowly. "What a lovely name." My mother had already turned back to my father, their attention absorbed by my sister Cassandra and her fiancé, the golden couple of the evening. I watched Sandra watching me, and I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Not yet." She tilted her head, almost imperceptibly, and said nothing. I need to back up. I grew up in a house where everything was divided into two categories: Cassandra's things and things that didn't matter. My sister was 3 years younger than me, which I always found a particular kind of cruel. The way a younger sibling can somehow become the standard by which the older one is measured and found lacking. Cassandra was the pretty one, the social one, the one who knew how to walk into a room and own it. I was the one who stayed in her bedroom with books and a sewing machine my grandmother had left me when she died. My mother never said outright that she preferred Cassandra. She didn't have to. It lived in the small things: who got the car on prom night, whose college application she proofread, whose apartment she offered to help furnish when we both left home. I put myself through 2 years of community college and then transferred to a state school on scholarships I applied for myself, in a kitchen at midnight because the computer in the living room was always occupied by Cassandra's video calls. I studied textile design and business, not because anyone suggested it, because I had been making things with my hands since I was 9 years old, and somewhere around my junior year of college I realized that the small alterations I was doing for classmates out of my dorm room had turned into something I could actually build on. I graduated, moved to Austin, and started small. A single-room studio I rented by the month on the east side. A website I built myself on a Sunday afternoon. A name I chose carefully, Marin Studio, because Marin was my grandmother's middle name and the sewing machine she left me was still the best piece of equipment I owned. That was 6 years ago. I don't talk about what Marin Studio became, not with my family. Not because I'm ashamed, because every time I tried, the conversation slid sideways. My mother would say something like, "That's nice, honey, but Cassandra just got a promotion." Or my father would nod in the distracted way that meant he wasn't listening. After a while, I stopped trying. It was easier to let them believe I was still doing alterations out of a small shop somewhere. They weren't entirely wrong about the alterations part, at least not in the beginning. By the time Cassandra got engaged to a man named Cole, whose mother Sandra ran one of the largest commercial real estate development firms in the state of Texas, Marin Studio had a team of 11 people, 2 wholesale accounts with regional department store chains, and a production partnership with a manufacturer outside of Nashville. We were not large, we were not a household name, but we were profitable in a way that would have surprised my parents considerably if they had ever thought to ask. They didn't ask. The engagement dinner was at a restaurant in Houston my parents had chosen because Cassandra liked it. It was the kind of place with white tablecloths and a sommelier and a menu that didn't list prices, which I noticed made my father slightly nervous. He kept clearing his throat and looking at the wine list like it had personally offended him. I had driven 3 hours from Austin for this. I arrived on time, alone, in the kind of clothes I made for myself when I was testing new patterns. A charcoal wrap dress in a fabric I'd sourced from a mill in North Carolina. Simple, well-made. The kind of thing that looked like nothing until someone who knew fabric touched it. Sandra touched it. Not intrusively, we were standing near the bar waiting to be seated, and she reached out and caught the edge of my sleeve between 2 fingers the way a person does when they're identifying something they recognize. "Excuse me," she said. "Is this?" She stopped herself. "Where did you get this fabric?" "I made it," I said. She looked at me differently after that. Dinner proceeded the way family dinners involving my mother and Cassandra always proceeded. Cassandra talked about the wedding, which she had been planning for approximately 4 months, with the urgency of someone defusing a bomb. Cole talked about his job in finance. My mother talked about Cassandra. My father ate steadily and contributed periodic affirmations. I answered questions when they were directed at me, which wasn't often, and spent most of the meal listening to Sandra ask polite, incisive questions that nobody in my family seemed to recognize as the professional habit they were. At some point during the main course, my mother explained to Sandra what I did for a living. Lydia does sewing work, she said. Alterations, repairs. She has a little shop. She said it the way you'd describe a child's lemonade stand, fondly, diminutively, with the implication that it was a phase that had simply gone on longer than expected. We always hoped she'd do something more stable, but she's happy enough. My father nodded. She's always been good with her hands, he added, in the tone of someone searching for a compliment and landing on the most neutral one available. I cut a piece of my salmon and did not look up. Across the table, I saw Sandra set down her fork. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I met her eyes briefly and gave the same small shake of my head I had given her earlier. She picked her fork back up, said nothing. The wedding was set for early October, which gave Cassandra approximately 6 months to turn what should have been a pleasant celebration into a logistics project of near-military complexity. She wanted a venue outside of San Antonio, a renovated historic property with stone walls and oak trees and a ceremony space that could hold 250 guests. She had a florist, a caterer, a photographer, a band, and opinions about napkin folds that I did not fully understand. She also wanted me to make the bridesmaids' dresses. I want to be fair about this, she asked nicely at first. She came to Austin in March, 3 months before the wedding, and sat in my studio, which she had never visited before, and looked around with an expression I can only describe as politely baffled, like someone who had walked into a room larger than they expected. She didn't say anything about the space. She showed me photos on her phone of the dresses she wanted, described the fabric, the silhouette, the color. I know you're busy, she said, but it would mean so much to me, and obviously I'd cover the cost of materials. Materials, not labor, not time, materials. I said yes because she was my sister. I said yes because somewhere underneath everything, I still believed that if I kept showing up, kept giving, kept being present in the ways I was asked to be, something would eventually shift. I made 4 bridesmaid dresses in 10 weeks. I sourced the fabric myself because what she'd described wasn't available in the color she wanted off the shelf. I drove to Dallas to meet with a supplier because the sample I needed wasn't something I could evaluate from a photograph. I fitted each dress twice, drove to Houston for the second round of fittings, and altered 2 of them a third time when the measurements came in different than what I'd been given. My sister texted me thank yous. She did not ask about my drive time, my material costs beyond the initial supply run, or whether I had missed anything at work to accommodate her schedule. 2 weeks before the wedding, she called me. The venue fell through, she said. Her voice was tight in the way that meant she had been crying before she picked up the phone. The original property had a flooding issue in the lower reception hall and couldn't guarantee the space. I'm so sorry, I said. Do you have a backup? There was a pause. Actually, she said, I was thinking about your property. I own a small piece of land outside of Fredericksburg, Texas. I bought it 4 years ago when I was looking for a manufacturing space that was close enough to Austin to be practical but not so expensive that it ate my entire operating budget. There's an old farmhouse on it that I've been slowly renovating, not to live in, but because I liked having a place that was mine in a way a city apartment wasn't. The grounds are about 3 acres. There are oak trees. There's a barn I converted into a workshop space that has since become more workshop than barn. It's not a wedding venue, but I can see how, if you were looking at it from a certain angle and a certain level of desperation, it might resemble one. Cassandra, I said. It's beautiful, Lydia. I've seen the pictures. And you have all that space, and it would actually be more personal. It's not set up for an event of that size, but it could be. With some setup, Cole's mom knows a rental company that does outdoor events. They could bring everything. What she meant, I understood, was that I would provide the land, the space, the access, and presumably the goodwill that would make all of this not feel like an imposition. And the wedding would proceed as planned on a timeline that had not shifted at all. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. I talked to my operations manager, a woman named Bev, who has worked with me since the 2nd year of Marin's studio, and who has never once sugarcoated a business or personal assessment. She said, you're going to do it and you know it, so let's at least make sure you don't destroy the workshop space. She was right. I said yes. What happened in the 2 weeks between that phone call and the wedding was the kind of thing I have since filed under experiences that confirm what you already knew about people. Cassandra called 4 more times. once about parking logistics, once about whether I could move some equipment out of the barn, just to make it more open. It'll be beautiful, which I declined because the equipment was expensive and the timeline was unreasonable. Once about whether I could recommend a local grocery store near Fredericksburg for her out-of-town guests, which I did. Once, 3 days before the wedding, to ask if I could come early to help coordinate because the day of coordinator was driving from San Antonio and wouldn't arrive until 11. I came early. I spent 4 hours the morning of my sister's wedding moving chairs into position, confirming with the caterer about the layout of the reception tables, and directing the rental company's crew when their contact's phone went to voicemail. My mother arrived mid-morning, took a long look at the property, and said, "I always forget you own this place, it's so tucked away." She did not offer to help. By noon I had changed out of my work clothes and into the dress I'd made for the occasion, a deep wine-colored sheath in a lightweight crepe that draped the way I'd intended. I had my hair done in the farmhouse bathroom. I put on the earrings my grandmother had given me, which I wore on days when I needed to feel steady. The ceremony was at 4. Beautiful, genuinely. Cassandra was radiant, and Cole looked at her like she was the only person in the field. I stood in the second row and let myself feel that without complicating it. Whatever else was true, this part was real. The reception was where things started to move differently. Sandra found me near the bar about 40 minutes into the reception. She had a glass of white wine and the focused, unhurried energy of someone who had been waiting for an opportune moment. "You own this property," she said. "Yes, and you made the bridesmaids' dresses, yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Lydia, what exactly does your studio do?" So I told her. Not everything, not the revenue figures or the wholesale accounts, because that's not a first conversation kind of information, and Sandra struck me as someone who would find it presumptuous. But I told her about Marin's studio, the team, the production partnership in Nashville, the department store accounts, the direction I was trying to take the brand over the next 2 years. She listened in the way that people who are genuinely successful listen, without interrupting, without performing interest, just absorbing. When I finished, she said, "I've been looking for a vendor for a project we're developing, a mixed-use residential property in San Antonio. We want to offer design partnerships for the model units, furniture, soft goods, textiles, custom, local if possible." She paused. "Would you be open to a conversation?" "Yes," I said, "I would." She pulled a card from a small clutch I hadn't noticed she was carrying. "My direct line, call me next week." I took the card. She moved back toward her family's table and I stayed where I was for a moment, looking out at the property. My property, lit with string lights against the October dark. My mother found me 20 minutes later. She was in the bright, elevated mood she got after 2 glasses of wine when things were going well, and she linked her arm through mine and said, "Isn't this just perfect? Cassandra is so happy. You did such a good job with the setup this morning, sweetheart. I don't know what we would have done without you." "Happy to help," I said. "Sandra seems lovely, doesn't she?" "Very successful. Her firm is apparently." My mother paused, searching for the phrasing. "Well, Cole says they're very well established. Real estate." She said it with the particular warmth she reserved for other people's accomplishments. "It's so good for Cassandra to be connected to people like that." I looked at the card in my hand. "Yes," I said. "It really is. Here is what I should explain, because it matters, and because I'm still not entirely sure how to feel about it. I didn't set out to orchestrate anything. I did not plan the venue falling through, did not plan Sandra being at the engagement dinner, did not plan the conversation by the bar. I simply kept showing up, kept doing what I knew how to do, and at some point the picture that my family had been painting of me for the last 15 years collided with reality in a way that was difficult to ignore. What I did plan, or at least allow to unfold intentionally, was the moment during the reception dinner. Sandra had been seated at the table adjacent to my parents. I was 2 tables over. At some point during the main course, I saw my mother lean towards Sandra with the particular body language of someone sharing something they consider mildly embarrassing but ultimately charming. Head tilted, voice lowered, the small self-deprecating smile. I was too far away to hear. But I had heard this particular performance before. I knew what she was saying, she was explaining me. The way she always did with new people who seemed important. A brief, affectionate sketch, designed to preemptively manage expectations, my sewing, my little shop. How I'd always been more comfortable with crafts than ambition. How they'd hoped for more, but, well, I watched Sandra's face. Sandra listened, nodded once, and then said something that made my mother go completely still. I found out later, from Cole, who had been seated close enough to hear, that what Sandra said was this. Actually, your daughter and I had a very interesting conversation earlier. She runs a studio with a wholesale production operation and 2 regional retail accounts. We're actually in discussions about a potential design contract. A pause. She's quite remarkable, you must be very proud. My mother, Cole told me, had stared at Sandra for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "Yes, of course." I drove back to Austin the next morning. The rental company had cleared most of the equipment the night before, and Bev had arranged for the remaining cleanup. I walked the property once before I left. The oak trees still wrapped with the string lights. The crew hadn't finished taking down. The barn quiet, the grass slightly flattened where the reception tent had stood. The card Sandra had given me was in my jacket pocket. I called her on Tuesday. We met in Dallas 2 weeks later. The design contract she'd described was real and substantial enough that I brought Bevid into the second meeting, and we spent 3 hours going through scope and timelines and the particular requirements of model unit staging for a mixed-use residential development. We signed the contract in November. My mother called me a few weeks after the wedding. She said the wedding had been beautiful, that Cassandra was so happy, that the property had been absolutely perfect. She asked how things were going with the shop. "Good," I said. "Really good." "Well," she said in the voice she used when she was feeling her way towards something she wasn't quite sure how to say. Cole mentioned that Sandra mentioned, that you two were doing some kind of project together? "A design contract," I said. "For a real estate development she's working on." "Oh," a pause. "Well, Lydia, that's wonderful. Thank you. I didn't realize your work had gotten so." She stopped. "Professional," I offered. "I was going to say involved," she said back quietly. I let that sit for a moment. Outside my studio window, 2 of my team members were examining fabric swatches spread across the work table. The sewing machine my grandmother had left me was in the corner, retired now but kept. Because some things you keep not for what they are anymore, but for what they were when you needed them. "It's been involved for a while," I said, not unkindly. "You just never asked." She didn't have an answer for that. We talked for a few more minutes about ordinary things. The weather, Cassandra's honeymoon photos, whether my father's knee was improving. When we hung up, I sat for a moment in the particular quiet that follows a conversation that doesn't resolve anything, but somehow still manages to move something forward. Then I got up, went back to the work table, and got to work. That's the thing about building something over years. In a room where no one is watching, eventually it becomes real whether they were watching or not. The structure holds, the seams stay. You don't need anyone to verify it. You already know what it's made of because you made it yourself.